The lunchtime rush at the Gilded Spoon was a familiar storm of clattering cutlery, impatient sighs, and the relentless tapping of Mr. Thorne's pen against his clipboard as he surveyed his domain. Elara Vance moved through the chaos like a quiet stream navigating a field of boulders. At 26, with a kindness in her eyes that often went unnoticed and a calmness that was frequently mistaken for slowness by her perpetually stressed manager, Elara was just another waitress in a sea of aprons, trying to make ends meet. Mr. Thorne, a man whose smile seemed to have been surgically removed and replaced with a permanent frown of disapproval, valued two things above all: speed and silence, the latter primarily from his staff, unless they were upselling desserts. "Vance! Table 7 needs water now! Don't dawdle!" he'd bark, his voice cutting through the din. Elara would simply nod, her spirit unruffled, and attend to the request with her usual quiet efficiency. She wasn't slow, she was observant. She noticed the slight tremor in an elderly woman's hand and preemptively offered a straw. The way a child's eyes lit up at the sight of the colorful specials board. The subtle cues of a couple on a first date, ensuring their experience was smooth rather than rushed. These were the details Mr. Thorne, in his whirlwind of perceived efficiency, consistently missed. Today, the usual cacophony was pierced by a different kind of sound, a low, distressed moan, escalating into a frustrated cry. It emanated from a corner booth where a well-dressed man was trying, with a pained expression, to settle a young boy. Elara had seen them enter a few minutes earlier. The man, tall and with an air of quiet authority, had requested a secluded table. The boy, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, clutched a worn blue teddy bear, his body tense, his hands flapping intermittently beside his ears. Several waitstaff scurried past, their eyes flicking towards the commotion before hastily looking away. Mr. Thorne, from his perch near the kitchen pass, shot the booth a venomous glare, clearly irritated by the disruption. He started to march towards them, a lecture already forming on his lips. "Mr. Thorne." Elara intercepted him gently. "Table 4 needs their check. I can see to the new arrivals in the corner if you like." Thorne paused, his annoyance momentarily diverted. "Fine. But make it quick, Vance. We're not a Cretchy." He spun on his heel and stalked towards table 4. Elara approached the booth. The man, Mr. Julian Ashford, though she didn't know his name yet, looked exhausted and apologetic. His son, Ethan, was now rocking back and forth, his cries growing louder, his small hands balled into fists. The menu lay untouched. The vibrant colors and loud noises of the Gilded Spoon were clearly overwhelming him. "Hello," Elara said softly, her voice a balm in the surrounding noise. She didn't address the father first, but knelt slightly to be closer to Ethan's eye level, though she didn't force eye contact. "That's a very handsome bear. Does he have a name?" Ethan continued to cry, but the rhythm of his rocking hitched slightly. Mr. Ashford looked up, surprised by her calm demeanor. It's Barnaby," he offered, his voice strained. "My son, Ethan, he has autism. Sometimes new places are very difficult for him." "I understand," Elara said, her gaze gentle. She noticed the flickering fluorescent light directly above their booth. "Would it be all right if I tried something?" Without waiting for a verbal response, but seeing a flicker of desperate hope in Mr. Ashford's eyes, she reached up and, with a practiced nudge she'd used for a similar faulty bulb near the staff room, managed to make the annoying light go out, plunging their immediate alcove into a slightly softer, less harsh illumination. Ethan's cries softened a fraction, his rocking slowed. Elara then addressed Ethan again, her voice even quieter. "Barnaby looks like he might be a bit thirsty, Ethan. And maybe a little hungry." She didn't ask Ethan if he was hungry, but focused on the teddy, a small deflection that sometimes helped. What Elara didn't realize was that Mr. Julian Ashford wasn't just any concerned father. He was a titan of industry, a philanthropist whose foundations poured millions into child welfare and neurodiversity research. He had seen countless specialists, therapists, and caregivers interact with his son. Few, if any, had ever shown such immediate, intuitive understanding in a public, stressful setting. He watched, motionless, as a simple waitress began to achieve what he, with all his resources, often struggled to. Ethan didn't respond with words. He rarely did with strangers, but his distress continued to visibly lessen. The harsh, rhythmic cries subsided into softer, more controlled vocalizations, his gaze flicking from Elara to his bear and back again. Elara, taking this as a tentative signal, pulled a spare chair to the end of the booth, not sitting directly opposite, which could feel confrontational, but slightly to the side. "Sometimes," she said, still in that low, soothing tone, "when places are too loud and bright, it makes Barnaby feel like all the noises are shouting at him. Maybe he'd like a quiet game while we look at what he might like to eat." She took a clean napkin and, with a few quick, deft folds she'd learned from a children's book she'd once found, created a simple swan. She placed it gently on the table near Ethan's hand, not pushing it towards him, just letting it be there. Ethan's hand, which had been tightly clenched, unfurled slightly. His fingers twitched towards the napkin swan. Mr. Ashford watched, a lump forming in his throat. He'd spent years learning his son's cues, his triggers, his comforts. This young woman, in a matter of minutes, seemed to possess an innate roadmap to Ethan's world. He usually has the plain grilled chicken, cut into very small pieces, and some steamed carrots, not too soft. Mr. Ashford found himself saying, the information flowing out of him easily in her calming presence. "No sauces, and he prefers if the food items don't touch on the plate." Elara nodded, her expression one of genuine understanding rather than polite accommodation. "Of course, and for Barnaby?" she asked, a tiny smile playing on her lips as she glanced at the bear. Mr. Ashford almost chuckled. "Barnaby will have whatever Ethan has, I suspect." When the food arrived, Elara brought it herself. She'd spoken to the chef, a notoriously grumpy man named Sal, and had patiently explained the specific requirements. Sal, surprisingly, had complied without his usual grumbling, perhaps influenced by the sincerity in Elara's request. The chicken was perfectly plain, cut into tiny, uniform squares, the carrots a vibrant orange, placed with a distinct gap between them and the chicken. Ethan, however, still seemed hesitant. Elara then did something that truly astonished Mr. Ashford. She picked up a tiny piece of carrot with her own fork. "This is for Barnaby's strong legs," she said, pretending to offer it to the bear before easily popping it into her own mouth. Just right." Then, she loaded a small piece of chicken onto Ethan's fork, and this is for Ethan's clever mind. She held it out patiently, not moving it closer, just offering. After a moment that stretched, filled only with the distant clatter of the restaurant, Ethan slowly reached out, took the fork, and ate the chicken. Then, he picked up a piece of carrot himself. Mr. Ashford could have wept. Mealtimes were often battlegrounds, fraught with anxiety and frustration. This was a quiet victory, orchestrated by a waitress he'd never met. "Vance!" Mr. Thorne's sharp voice cut through the peaceful moment. He was hovering a few tables away, his face a mask of impatience. "You've got 3 tables waiting. Stop socializing and get to work." Elara flinched almost imperceptibly but maintained her composure. "Certainly, Mr. Thorne," she said, rising. "Enjoy your meal," she said softly to Mr. Ashford and Ethan, as Mr. Ashford settled the bill, leaving a tip that was more than Elara's earnings for an entire shift. He paused. "Excuse me," he said to Elara as she returned with his change. "May I have your full name, please?" "It's Elara Vance, sir," she replied, a little surprised. "Thank you, Elara Vance," he said, his gaze intense but kind. "Thank you for your exceptional kindness to my son." Elara simply smiled. "It was my pleasure. Ethan is a wonderful boy." What Elara didn't realize as she watched Mr. Ashford guide a now calm and fed Ethan out of the restaurant was that her name was already being noted down, not just on a receipt, but in the memory of a man who had the power to change lives, and who had just witnessed something he considered a small miracle. He was already thinking beyond a generous tip. He was thinking about potential, about an intuition so rare it felt like a gift, and about how such a gift was being utterly wasted in the impersonal hustle of the gilded spoon. A few days later, Elara was engrossed in mending a tear in her younger sister's school backpack, the evening light fading outside her small, tidy apartment window. The memory of Ethan Ashford and his father had stayed with her, a warm spot in the usual grind of her week. Mr. Thorne had been particularly insufferable since, finding fault with every little thing, almost as if her quiet success with the Ashfords had personally offended him. A polite but firm knock on her door startled her. It was too late for casual visitors. Peeking through the peephole, she saw a smartly dressed woman she didn't recognize, standing beside an equally polished man who looked like a chauffeur, a sleek black car gleaming at the curb behind them. Puzzled, Elara opened the door a crack. "Yes, Miss Elara Vance," the woman inquired, her tone professional but not unkind. "My name is Susan Carmichael. I'm an assistant to Mr. Julian Ashford. He has requested a meeting with you and has sent a car." Elara was stunned into silence. Mr. Ashford, the kind man from the restaurant. Why would he send a car for her? Her mind raced through a dozen unlikely scenarios. Had she shortchanged him by mistake? Had Ethan left Barnaby behind? "Is everything all right?" Elara finally managed. "Everything is perfectly fine, Miss Vance," Susan assured her with a slight smile. "Mr. Ashford was very impressed by you and would like to discuss a potential opportunity, if you're amenable, of course." An hour later, Elara found herself sitting in a plush armchair in a penthouse office that seemed to float above the glittering city skyline. The contrast to her cramped apartment and the greasy air of the Gilded Spoon's kitchen was dizzying. Mr. Julian Ashford rose from behind a large mahogany desk, extending his hand with a warm smile. "Miss Vance, Elara? Thank you for coming on such short notice." "Or Mr. Ashford," she replied, her voice a little breathless. "It's no problem at all. I hope Ethan is well. He is, thank you." "In large part due to you," Mr. Ashford said, his gaze direct and sincere. He gestured for her to sit. "Elara, what I witnessed in your interaction with Ethan at the restaurant, it was more than just good service. It was an incredible display of intuition, empathy, and skill. Skills that, Frankly, I have rarely seen, even among trained professionals. He paused, then leaned forward slightly. I own Ashford Developments, but my true passion lies in the Ashford Foundation, which supports children with diverse needs. We are currently in the planning stages of a new flagship project, the Ethan Ashford Center for Inclusive Development. It's envisioned as a place that will offer holistic support therapy, education, play, all designed around the individual needs of children like Ethan. Elara listened, captivated and a little overwhelmed. The thing is, Elara, Mr. Ashford continued, why have architects, therapists, educators, but we need someone with that spark of genuine human connection, someone who understands, on an almost instinctual level, what these children experience. Someone who can help us shape the environment and the approach from a place of true empathy. I believe you are that someone. He then laid out his offer. It wasn't just a job as Ethan's personal caregiver, though that was part of it initially, to build on their connection. He was offering her a significant role to consult on the design and ethos of the new center, to work alongside the specialists, to bring her unique perspective to the project. The salary he mentioned made her head spin. I don't know what to say, Mr. Ashford. Elara stammered, her mind reeling. I'm just a waitress. I don't have formal qualifications in child development. You have something far rarer, Elara, he said gently. You have a gift. Qualifications can be acquired. Intuition like yours cannot be taught. Elara felt a surge of emotion, disbelief, gratitude, and a sudden, unexpected flicker of hope for a future she'd never dared to imagine. Meanwhile, back at the Gilded Spoon, Mr. Thorne had heard a garbled version of events from another waitress who'd seen Elara leave in a fancy car. Vance. Getting into a chauffeured car. He scoffed to Sal, the chef, during a lull. She's probably trying to scam some rich old fool. People like her always have an angle. She'll be back here begging for shifts in a week, you mark my words. What neither Elara nor Mr. Thorne realized was that, behind the scenes, another, more formidable challenge was brewing. Mr. Ashford's long-time chief of staff, Ms. Victoria Sterling, a woman known for her razor-sharp intellect and fiercely protective stance over Mr. Ashford and his interests, had been informed of the potential new hire, a waitress. Plucked from obscurity on a whim, Ms. Sterling, a believer in pedigrees and proven track records, was deeply skeptical. She prided herself on her judgment of character and, from her perspective, Elara Vance was an unknown, untested variable. A potentially risky one, and Ms. Sterling had already initiated a discreet, thorough background check on the unsuspecting waitress from the Gilded Spoon. A different plan was indeed unfolding in the shadows, one that could derail Elara's opportunity before it even truly began. Elara accepted Mr. Ashford's offer, her heart a mixture of trepidation and exhilaration. Stepping away from the familiar drudgery of the Gilded Spoon felt like shedding a heavy coat she hadn't realized she was wearing. Her initial days were focused on Ethan. She spent hours with him at the Ashford residence, a sprawling but surprisingly warm home. Under her patient guidance, Ethan began to explore new foods, tolerate different textures, and even initiate small, non-verbal interactions with more frequency. His therapists noted a marked improvement in his engagement and a decrease in his anxiety levels. Mr. Ashford watched these developments with quiet joy, his belief in Elara solidifying with each passing day. Soon, Elara was drawn into the planning meetings for the Ethan Ashford Center. Architects spread out blueprints, child psychologists discussed therapeutic modalities, and educators debated curriculum frameworks. Initially, Elara felt like an imposter, surrounded by degrees and acronyms she didn't understand. But Mr. Ashford encouraged her to speak, to share her observations. "Elara," he'd say gently in a meeting where jargon flew thick and fast, "from your perspective, how would a child like Ethan experience this proposed sensory room?" And Elara, remembering the overwhelming flicker of the light at the gilded spoon, or the way Ethan recoiled from certain sounds, would offer practical, intuitive insights. Perhaps the lighting could be more individually controlled, with options for softer, warmer hues, not just dimmers on bright lights, she suggested. And for the acoustic panels, maybe consider textures that are also calming to the touch, as some children self-soothe through tactile input. The specialists, initially surprised by her non-clinical language, soon began to appreciate the profound, lived understanding behind her suggestions. Her ideas were often simple, yet transformative, focusing on the small details that could make a world of difference to a neurodivergent child. However, navigating these new waters wasn't without its undercurrents. Ms. Victoria Sterling, Mr. Ashford's chief of staff, was a constant, chilling presence. Polite, impeccably professional, her skepticism towards Elara was a palpable force. Ms. Sterling attended many of the meetings, her sharp eyes missing nothing, her questions often pointed, designed to test Elara's depth of knowledge, or as Elara sometimes felt, to expose her lack of formal qualifications. Ms. Sterling would inquire during a discussion on playground design, her tone perfectly even. "While your anecdotal experience with Ethan is noted, what established research supports your preference for muted color palettes over more conventionally stimulating ones in developmental play areas?" Elara would do her best to explain her reasoning, based on her observations of Ethan's sensitivities, but she often felt like a student facing a grueling oral exam. What Ms. Sterling didn't realize was that her probing, while intimidating, was actually forcing Elara to articulate her intuitive knowledge more clearly, to bridge the gap between instinct and established practice. Back in her old world, Mr. Thorne was having a field day. Having confirmed Elara wasn't returning, he painted her departure as an act of flighty irresponsibility. "Good riddance," he'd tell the other staff. She was never cut out for real work. Probably latched onto some rich guy. It won't last. His bitterness, however, did little to improve the atmosphere at the Gilded Spoon, where service seemed to grow more perfunctory by the day. Elara, meanwhile, threw herself into her new role, often spending her evenings devouring books and articles on child development, sensory processing, and inclusive design, determined to substantiate her instincts with knowledge. It was during one such late-night research session, while reviewing budgetary allocations for Ashford Philanthropy's existing community outreach programs, Mr. Ashford had given her broad access to understand the foundation's scope, that she noticed something odd. A significant portion of funds designated for specialized learning materials and adaptive equipment seemed to be consistently channeled through a single, somewhat obscure supplier, with invoices that were less detailed than others. Furthermore, the reports from a particular community center, overseen by a long-tenured foundation manager named Mr. Alastair Finch, showed surprisingly low engagement with these supposedly enhanced resources. It was a small discrepancy, easily overlooked, but it snagged at Elara's meticulous nature. She made a note of it, a tiny seed of unease planted in her mind. For now, her focus was the Ethan Ashford Center and proving Ms. Sterling wrong. But a nagging feeling told her this was something she might need to revisit. The waters she was navigating were proving to be deeper and potentially more treacherous than she had imagined. The seed of unease about the financial discrepancies grew. Elara found herself increasingly drawn to the meticulous, if dry, work of tracing the paper trails within the Ashford Foundation's outreach programs. Mr. Ashford, noticing her diligence and the thoughtful questions she occasionally posed about operational efficiencies, gave her his quiet encouragement. "Fresh eyes often see what familiarity has obscured, Elara," he'd said. "If something doesn't seem right to you, it's worth understanding why." This was a subtle permission slip, and Elara used it judiciously. She wasn't looking for trouble, but her innate sense of order and fairness, the same sense that made her a good waitress and a compassionate caregiver, couldn't ignore the inconsistencies. She learned that Mr. Alistair Finch, the manager overseeing the department with the questionable expenditures, was a veteran of the foundation, hired long before Ms. Sterling's tenure as chief of staff. He was widely regarded as a fixture, perhaps a little set in his ways, but generally considered reliable. Ms. Sterling herself, while not Finch's direct supervisor in programs, respected his experience and had, on occasion, defended his department's autonomy when budgetary reviews came up. Elara discovered that Mr. Finch often approved payments for consultancy and custom material sourcing from the preferred supplier with minimal oversight, citing the unique needs of the programs. Yet, when Elara referenced these expenditures with the community center's inventory logs and user feedback, she requested, under the guise of understanding resource utilization for the new centered. She found a pattern: high costs for items that were either underutilized, of surprisingly generic quality, or in some cases, seemingly non-existent beyond the invoice. It wasn't blatant theft, perhaps, but it smacked of gross mismanagement, wasteful spending, and a complacency that diverted precious resources from those who needed them most. Her investigation was delicate, conducted mostly in her own time, piecing together information from disparate reports. She knew she was walking a tightrope. Accusing a long-standing manager, especially one implicitly trusted by Ms. Sterling, was a dangerous move for someone still considered an outsider. Ms. Sterling, for her part, remained watchful. She had noted Elara's quiet diligence extending beyond the Ethan Ashford Center. Initially, she'd suspected Elara might be overstepping, perhaps on a power trip. But then she observed an interaction: Elara presenting some preliminary costings for a sensory garden at the new center, had politely but firmly questioned a quote from a supplier Finch had recommended, pointing out similar, higher quality materials available for less from another vendor. Finch had been patronizingly dismissive. "My dear Miss Vance," he'd said with a smug smile, "there are nuances to procurement in our specialized field that a newcomer wouldn't yet appreciate." Elara had simply replied, "Perhaps, Mr. Finch, but value for money and transparent sourcing are nuances everyone should appreciate, especially when donor funds are involved." Ms. Sterling, overhearing this exchange, felt a flicker of something unexpected: respect for Elara's quiet tenacity and a nascent doubt about Mr. Finch's infallibility. What Elara didn't realize was that Miss Sterling, a woman fiercely loyal to Mr. Ashford's true mission, was beginning to see Elara not as a threat, but as a potential, if unconventional, asset in safeguarding that mission. Meanwhile, Mr. Thorne, stewing in his bitterness, decided to take direct action. He composed a self-righteous letter to Ashford Development's corporate HR, anonymously of course, detailing how an unqualified and manipulative former employee, Elara Vance, had likely deceived Mr. Ashford into a position of trust. He painted her as opportunistic and untrustworthy. His timing, however, was poor. Unbeknownst to him, several of his current employees at the Gilded Spoon, tired of his abrasive management and inspired by Elara's quiet strength and subsequent unlikely success, had recently lodged their own formal complaints about his bullying behavior and unfair practices. Thorne's poisoned pen letter would eventually land on a desk already primed to investigate him. The climax was rapidly approaching. Mr. Ashford, pleased with the progress on the Ethan Ashford Center and Elara's increasingly confident contributions, scheduled a full board meeting for the foundation. The agenda: a final review of the center's plans and budget, and a broader discussion on the foundation's operational effectiveness. Elara was asked to present her vision for the center's daily life and user experience. She knew this was also her chance, if she dared take it, to bring the other, more troubling findings to light. The unveiling was imminent, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The boardroom at Ashford Philanthropies was imposing, all polished mahogany and hushed anticipation. Board members, influential figures in their own rights, listened intently as Elara, poised and articulate, walked them through her vision for the Ethan Ashford Center. She spoke not of abstract theories, but of creating a haven of understanding, a place where children like Ethan could flourish, supported by an environment that catered to their unique ways of experiencing the world. She used anecdotes, her own observations, and the research she had diligently compiled. Her passion was palpable, her insights undeniably profound. Even Ms. Sterling, seated beside Mr. Ashford, found herself nodding in agreement more than once. When Elara finished, there was a moment of genuine, appreciative silence before applause filled the room. Mr. Ashford beamed with pride. The agenda then shifted to budgetary matters and operational reviews. Mr. Alistair Finch presented his department's report with his usual air of unshakable confidence, glossing over details and emphasizing long-term successes. When Mr. Ashford opened the floor for questions, Elara took a deep breath. "Mr. Finch," she began, her voice clear and steady, "I had a few questions regarding the allocation of funds for specialized learning materials in the community outreach programs. Specifically, concerning the procurement processes with the vendor, EduCraft Solutions." Finch's smile tightened. "Miss Vance, as I believe I've mentioned, these are complex supplier relationships built over years." "I understand," Elara interjected politely but firmly. "However, in reviewing the invoices against an inventory logs and utilization reports from several centers, I found some significant discrepancies. For example, over 200,000 was spent last year on adaptive sensory kits from EduCraft, yet fewer than 15% of these kits appear to be actively in use, and feedback suggests their quality is substandard compared to market alternatives available at a lower cost." She produced a concise, organized file with comparative data, invoices, and summarized feedback. There also appear to be substantial consultancy fees paid to EduCraft for services whose deliverables are not clearly documented. A stunned silence fell over the boardroom. Finch went pale, then flushed a dangerous red. "This is an outrageous accusation!" This waitress has no understanding of our procedures or the sensitive nature of our work." Before Mr. Ashford could intervene, Ms. Victoria Sterling spoke, her voice cutting through the tension like ice. "Actually, Mr. Finch," she said, her gaze unwavering, "Miss Vance shared some of her preliminary concerns with me last week. While I initially urged caution, her diligence in documenting these anomalies is commendable." She turned to the board. "Based on the evidence Miss Vance has compiled, and frankly, Mr. Finch's dismissive reaction now, I believe a full, independent audit of your department's expenditures and supplier contracts is not only warranted but immediately necessary." The shock on Finch's face was profound. Ms. Sterling, his presumed institutional ally, had just publicly sided with Elara. Mr. Ashford's expression was grave. "I concur, Victoria. Mr. Finch, you are suspended, effective immediately, pending the results of this audit. We will not tolerate mismanagement or the squandering of resources intended for vulnerable children." The fallout was swift. The audit, spearheaded by Ms. Sterling with Elara providing crucial background, uncovered years of complacency, cronyism with EduCraft Solutions, which turned out to have personal ties to Finch, and significant wastage. Finch was terminated, and legal proceedings were initiated to recover misappropriated funds. As for Mr. Thorne, his malicious letter to HR had indeed backfired spectacularly. Juxtaposed with the credible complaints from his own staff, it painted him as a petty, vindictive tyrant. The Gilded Spoon's ownership, already concerned by declining reviews, terminated his contract. The restaurant, under new, more empathetic management, began a slow process of repair. Elara Vance was more than vindicated. Mr. Ashford, profoundly impressed by her integrity, courage, and sharp intellect, appointed her as the first director of operations for the Ethan Ashford Center for Inclusive Development. Furthermore, he asked her to join a newly formed ethics and oversight committee for the entirety of Ashford Philanthropies, ensuring her grounded, compassionate perspective would influence all their endeavors. Ms. Sterling, her initial skepticism long vanquished, became a genuine mentor and ally to Elara, guiding her through the complexities of her new role. The Ethan Ashford Center for Inclusive Development opened its doors a year later, a vibrant, welcoming space that was a testament to Elara's vision and Mr. Ashford's dream. It quickly became a beacon of hope and innovative care, its design and programs reflecting a deep understanding of the children it served. Elara, no longer an overlooked waitress, but a respected leader, found her true calling, not just caring for one child, but shaping a world that was more accepting and supportive of all children. She had initiated systemic change, proving that one person's integrity and empathy could indeed move mountains. And so, Elara Vance's journey from the overlooked tables of the Gilded Spoon to the forefront of philanthropic innovation serves as a powerful reminder that true talent and compassion can be found in the most unexpected places, and that integrity ultimately prevails. If this story of resilience and the fight for justice stirred something in you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring narratives about people who turned adversity into triumph. What was the most impactful moment for you?